Well, good afternoon, and my name is Scott Rayder, and I'm going to be the MC for today's program on towards a U.S. Weather Commission, protecting lives, livelihoods, and the American economy. And I want to welcome all of you to this event. It's sponsored by the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research and the Weather Coalition. And I really appreciate the turnout. I know folks' schedules up here are extremely busy, and I really appreciate the time that you're taking out today to learn a little bit more about some recent events in the weather community that are extremely important to the nation. I want to thank Chairman Hall and the committee for letting us use this room. I will acknowledge that we originally booked it for 75 people. The turnout has exceeded our expectations, so I apologize for the closeness of the community here, but it's a great testament to the importance of this issue right now in the national dialogue. Quickly, I want to introduce our panelists. To my left, immediately to my left is John Armstrong, who's the chair of the Basque Committee, the Committee on the Assessment of the National Weather Service Modernization Program. Immediately to his left is Dr. William Gail, who's the co-founder and chief technology officer of Global Weather Corporation. To his left, Dr. Pamela Emch, who's a senior staff engineer and scientist with Northrop Grumman Aerospace Systems. She also wears two other hats. She's a co-chair of the Weather Coalition, and she also serves on many boards within the American Meteorological Society. So Pam has a lot of hats today. And at the far end of the table is my boss, because you always have to introduce your boss, Dr. Tom Bogdan, who is the president of the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. A quick overview, how we want to work today, and please continue to eat. The panelists are going to give 5 to 8 minute presentations on the Basque Committee, starting with John Armstrong talking about the Basque Committee, Bill Gail talking about his perspective as a private weather vendor, Pam Emch from the Weather Coalition, the community perspective, and then Tom Bogdan will wrap up from UCAR. We will then go to a question and answer period. So with that, let me turn it over to Dr. John Armstrong for his opening remarks.
I'm going to be spending a few minutes to talk about a recent report from the National Academy of Sciences entitled Weather Services for the Nation, with a subtitle, Becoming Second to None. But I want to give you first a little background. This committee that I've chaired over the last couple of years was asked for several years ago by Congress and charged with two jobs. One was to make the first comprehensive assessment of the Modernization and Restructuring program, which took place at the National Weather Service during the decade of the 90s. And we issued a report over a year ago giving our assessment of the MAR, as it's referred to. I'll simply say at this point that we concluded that the $4.5 billion, more or less, which was spent on that modernization and restructuring program was money very well spent. It created seriously improved public goods for the nation, and it enabled major changes in the service that could be provided by the National Weather Service. We were also asked to draw a list of lessons learned from that decade-long modernization and restructuring, and then use those lessons learned, if in fact it turned out to be appropriate to do so, in looking forward and advising the National Weather Service and NOAA on priorities for the coming decade of increased service. Now, I'll go to the next slide here. And we made this forward-looking study, which is the subject of the current report, with these assumptions about what the key challenges faced by the Weather Service are. One is to keep pace with the ineluctable improvement in science and technology. Since the MAR was finished in 2000, computing power and communications capabilities have improved at least by a factor of 64, which is a simple use of Moore's law. And the science has continued to improve as well, as far as making successful forecasts. We live in an information-centric society, which didn't used to be the case, and the expectations of the public and of the business community on access to data, to accurate forecasts, has exploded over this period and will continue to explode. And a third aspect of the environment is that there has emerged over the last several decades a very robust private sector of value-added weather service companies, which are a very important part of what our report calls the weather enterprise. Now, responding to these challenges, we had a number of findings and recommendations for the Weather Service and for NOAA, but they all fell under three major categories. The first is the idea that it's important to prioritize the core capabilities of the National Weather Service. The very important and a substantial set of functions that they perform, which nobody else can perform, and whose successful performance underlies the strength of the whole enterprise. We also concluded that because the structure of the Weather Service and relevant parts of NOAA were last changed in a significant way in the early part of the 90s, and because of the continuing very strong changes in technology and communications, it was appropriate to have a new look at the function and structure of the Weather Service. And then another set of recommendations from this report relate to our conviction that the nation will be very well served by an increasingly effective cooperation between the different parts of the enterprise. Now, this is a fairly busy slide, but it has a concept that I hope you will familiarize yourself with if you aren't already. And this is an attempt to illustrate what we mean by the weather enterprise. At its core, there are these irreplaceable services that the Weather Service provides, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the Weather Service interacts with the private sector, that's the sector to the bottom, and then with the research community, and then with the other agencies of the federal government and state governments that are concerned with the weather. And these sectors all, or many of them, interact with each other in addition to their interaction with the National Weather Service. Now, what we mean by the core capabilities is the creation of the foundational data sets, which are the observations, the assimilated observations, and the numerical weather forecasts. It is our view that that those core capabilities ought to be second to none in their accuracy and reliability. We also had recommendations about the use of probabilistic forecasting and predictions. There are many other essential functions that the Weather Service provides, the watches and warning and product dissemination of a variety of types. And then we have recommendations relating to the effectiveness with which new scientific results in the art of weather forecasting, the science and art in weather forecasting, can be integrated into operational forecasting, and vice versa, the ease with which the demands of operational forecasting can be reflected back to the research community. Now, evaluating the function and structure, we note first that the Congress has called for an independent study of the function and organization of the Weather Service, and our committee echoed that, but was very clear in pointing out that because of the very heavy scientific and technical content of the work of the Weather Service, that any consultant's view of potential reorganizations has to be very strongly affected by input from the scientific and technical communities. And we believe that this look should extend not only to the Weather Service, but to all of the related parts of NOAA. Now, as I said, the third of our major set of recommendations related to leveraging the entire enterprise, and this means strengthening the cooperation between the Weather Service, the academic community, and the very robust and growing set of private entities, as well as with other related parts of the federal government. We believe that that we already have seen how the improved cooperation over the last decade or so between the parts of the enterprise have greatly added to the public good, and we believe that there is still substantial room for improvement. I hope that some of you will take the advantage to take the opportunity to read our report, which is available on the National Academy's website and which will be available in hard copy before too long. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Next, Dr. William Gail, co-founder and chief technology officer with Global Weather Corporation.
But I'm here today to talk to you from the perspective of the business community, in particular the small business community. My company, Global Weather Corporation, provides precision weather data services to businesses that serve other sectors: energy, transportation, media, consumer. We're a growing business even in today's economy, and the reason is simple. These things, amongst other things. People are using weather information in new and increasingly valuable ways. They're using it extensively to do things that they never did before. Businesses are using it to become more efficient, more effective, and to drive their bottom lines. I think all of my private sector colleagues in this room are experiencing this. This is a tremendous market opportunity because the nation needs these kinds of services. Now let me anchor what I have to say in the Academy report. This is a figure out of the Academy report describing the information value chain that is used to deliver weather information from its source to the end users, whether they're consumers or businesses. So what's shown here is what we described in the report as the primary value chain and the secondary value chain. The primary value chain being those green boxes and circles that represent the data flow, information flow from NOAA directly to the end user, the public, and to businesses. But what we felt in this in our committee was that there is an increasingly viable and vibrant, what we called secondary value chain, all of the dash boxes that you see. Now, this is a particular example that we use to illustrate that situation. And this example reflects a situation where there's a severe storm threat accompanied by potential floods. And who are all the players in this ecosystem that deliver the information to the public? And what we found is that emergency managers who are managing the situation from a public perspective for individuals and for businesses really depend not only on NOAA, but on a wide variety of inputs. So they need inputs from the transportation community. Our transportation corridor is going to change as a result of this. They need input from the utilities to know whether the utilities are going to stay viable during this flood. And so all of these largely private sector, but not entirely private sector entities are serving up an emergency manager. And this is a combined effort to serve the interests of the nation, in this case, public and businesses for this particular case. But it's true of many other situations as well. You could redraw this diagram to illustrate how this public-private partnership, the relationship between NOAA and the remainder of the enterprise, is what's used to serve the public and the nation. And we looked, as part of the committee effort, we looked to see if we could find an analog to this public-private partnership. We think really it's pretty unique, a really very special relationship between the government entities, NOAA, Weather Service, and the remainder of the enterprise working together to deliver value to the nation. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because weather has an enormous impact on everything we do, individuals and businesses. A recent study coming out of the National Center for Atmospheric Research in 2011 showed that 3% of GDP variability is due to weather variability. And if you think about this a little deeper, it's easy to understand. So temperatures are higher than normal, energy prices change. There's drought, food prices change. Huge impact on the economy. 3% on an annual basis averaged over a number of years. That's huge. 10% in some states. So it varies region by region. We believe that we can help the economy grow through an improved ability to deliver weather information that serves these kinds of needs. Now, let me give you a couple of examples from my own company's experience of the kind of innovative things that are being done out in the business community to serve the nation with this sort of weather information. So Omaha World Herald, owned by the Berkshire Hathaway, has been in the process of acquiring other newspapers. Now, why would they do that? You say newspapers are dying. Well, it turns out that newspapers are a primary source of local information. Local information is not going to go away. There's always a need for local information, events, weather, various things, economic information. That need will be there. It is just being transformed from print into more digital media. Omaha World Herald understands this, and they also understand that weather information is a fundamental anchor of many other types of information that keep communities alive and keep communities growing economically. Second example, Xcel Energy. So Xcel Energy delivers energy from 10% of the U.S. wind turbines. In 2009, they realized that they weren't doing this very efficiently, that they needed to improve the forecast capability so that they could deliver the wind power more efficiently. So they went to NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, put their own money into developing an improved forecast capability. Use of that new forecast has saved them $7.9 million in 2011 alone, and that has been returned to their ratepayers, improving the efficiency of the economy. So let me summarize. Improved weather information can be an engine for economic growth, driven largely by the private sector, but in complement to the traditional NOAA mission of saving lives and property. Again, this is a great public-private partnership. It's built on a foundation, as John mentioned, of high-quality data from NOAA, but it's delivered oftentimes through this public-private partnership to the end user. So everything that I've presented here really is consistent with what we presented in the Academy report. This goes beyond the Academy report in the sense of laying out the groundwork of the economic engine, but we think it's quite important for the nation. Thank you.
Next up, Dr. Pamela Emch with Northrop Grumman and the Weather Coalition and AMS.
Good afternoon. As Scott mentioned, I wear several hats, and so along with being a member of the private sector, Northrop Grumman, I'm involved in AMS committees and boards. I'm a co-chair of the Weather Coalition, and I was a member of the National Academy's committee that put together this report. So what I'd like to do here is tell you a little bit more about the broader weather enterprise and how it interfaced with the preparation of this report. Here. Up here? No. Here.
Don't break it, I promise.
Okay, I have a couple of pages in here that gives just a very small partial listing of some of the entities that represent the National Weather Enterprise. The entities span the public, the private, the academic sectors. They're non-governmental organizations. They're advocacy groups. Examples are below, and I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of them. Bill touched on some of these a little bit, but for example, the fourth one down, the American Society of Civil Engineers. Some might wonder why that's up here. Well, you have the water resource community is highly represented there. So when you're talking about hydrology and water resources and planning for floods, flood control, dams, and so on, that's where they are, and obviously highly impacted by weather and changes in weather and extreme weather events. Below that, the American Wind Energy Association. Bill mentioned the energy statistics, so whether you're talking traditional forms of energy or renewable energy, again, highly impacted by the weather. Those are just two examples. So the weather really spans across the nation, impacts many, many different economic areas. Here's a remainder of the list, and as I said, it's not exhaustive, and in fact, really up here are primarily listed national level agencies, but you can add into that regional organizations, state organizations. They have almost the same span of different types of organizations. And then we come down to the local organizations as well, and how they deal with the weather, with extreme events, and with all things that are impacted by the weather, like water supply and so on. So it's huge. It's extremely diverse. The committee, the NRC committee and the National Academy has made a point of gathering inputs from across the national weather enterprise. We had speakers come in from the public sector, the private sector, the academic sector, and that was actually well represented on our committee as well. We also had information exchange at professional society meetings. For example, at the AMS annual meeting last January, there was a town hall event, and we gathered inputs from the audience members, asked them what their concerns were. They had looked at our Phase 1 report, and they had comments that we took into account when we developed our Phase 2 report, looking forward for the National Weather Service. In addition, when the National Academy's report is in draft form by us, it went out to review by members of the community, and those members included members of the National Academies, and also, again, encompassed a range of public, private, academic members, so spanned all parts of the enterprise. And interaction continues via outbrief of the report and discussion sessions. So there was an AMS summer community meeting in Norman, Oklahoma in August. This report was discussed there, again, telling folks what was contained in it, gathering inputs, getting feedback, and so on. So this interaction continues, and in fact, a lot of members of our National Weather Enterprise are in multiple organizations, like I am. So in the Weather Coalition, American Meteorological Society, we intermingle, and that's very good. And we have a lot of good discussions about what the priorities are for our community, individually and as a whole, and how do we make those priorities more apparent? How do we get that information out to those people who are not in our community? What's an effective way to do that? So we realize as an enterprise, and this has come up frequently in our discussions, that we have a need for consistent advocacy and stronger advocacy. The weather enterprise, the national weather enterprise here has to have a strong voice and has to convey the information in an organized and succinct way. We have to set community priorities, and if possible, we should tie those priorities to economic metrics and other metrics. We have to proactively advocate for those priorities, both on the Hill and also in the general community. I really don't know, I think my family members don't realize how they get weather reports. Where does that come from? How all the entities, all the different parts of this enterprise that are involved, from collecting observations to processing those observations to organizing those in a fashion that the public can understand. They just don't know the extent of this. We understand that. We want to be able to explain that more clearly and to advocate for the priorities. And we also understand that we need to be able to respond quickly to the critical issues of the day. When extreme events happen, when there's something of interest related to the weather enterprise, there needs to be a strong, we have separate voices and strong separate voices, but it would be good if there was a focal point, and we were better at having an organized community voice. So, in summary, I think the statement here at the bottom is a very good one, very clear. Effective organization of the weather enterprise as a whole is needed. We do communicate, we're organized, but it needs to be more effective than it has been. We need to have a strong NOAA and National Weather Service on the civil side. That, again, as John mentioned, was at the core of this weather enterprise. We must have a healthy research community, and we have to have and maintain a dynamic and competitive private sector. Those are all factors that are necessary for economic stability, innovation, for the good of the nation.
And our last panelist is Dr. Thomas Bogdan from UCAR. And on that, if you press the right button, the slide moves forward.
Thank you very much, Scott, and good afternoon. My fellow panelists here, I think, have done a superb job of teeing up the challenges and the opportunities that are out there for our nation and the weather enterprise as we move into century 21 that's dominated by information technology and increasing diversification of our economy. And so it's my job to try to begin to move that discussion forward by answering the question, what are we going to do about it? But let me start by going back and answering the question, why does it matter? This montage of pictures over the last several years will remind you of many of the huge weather impact events, starting with Joplin up in that upper corner, moving across to the summer urban heat island that Dallas became for 70 days of 100-plus temperatures, moving down to the wildfires that have ravaged the western part of the country where I'm from. Those of you in Chicago can recognize Lakeshore Drive, not passable. People were stranded out there from snowstorms. The flooding from Isaac. And finally, in the center, those of you living in Washington, the derecho that came through and did tremendous damage to your yards and allowed you to understand what it's like to live without power for a certain period of time. But let's do the numbers behind it. This is a very fascinating chart. The bar chart maps over to the left column. It is the number of weather-related events going back to 1980, which had an impact of $1 billion or more. And over on the right side, that the solid line deals with is the accumulated impact of those losses on our economy. And there's two things that are pretty clear there. 2005, who remembers what 2005 was? Katrina, absolutely. Katrina alone was over $100 billion in its impact. And the second thing is look at that trend. We as a nation are becoming increasingly vulnerable to the impacts of extreme weather. And that's what this plot is telling you. And those impacts have critical economic impacts on our nation. There's another side to the coin, and that is the tremendous private industry that Dr. Gail has talked about that is coming forward to create a diverse suite of products and services and data collection necessary to meet the rapidly evolving needs of our customers. And this is just a smattering of some of the logos that can get out there. But there's another important takeaway message here, which is just day-to-day weather is economically important. I'll share with you a story about the Land's End Corporation. Last year, they made a substantial investment in heavy winter clothing, and guess what happened in the upper Midwest? It was a fairly warm winter. They took a horrible loss on that. Any knowledge they might have had about what that winter could be like could have allowed them to hedge their bets and to make better decisions around what they do. So weather indeed has its tentacles into almost a third of our gross domestic product when you think about those impacts. So what are we going to do about it? Luckily, those of you on the Hill and on the administration actually have led the way with a format and structure that has worked very effectively. I'm referring back to the Oceans Act of 2000. The Oceans Act created the U.S. Commission on Ocean Policy that ran from 2000 to 2004. Its job was the first comprehensive view of the management and stewardship of our marine environment around our coast. Consisted of 16 commissioners. It was led by the late Admiral Watkins and 26-member Science Advisory Board. And why did we do it? We did it because of the critical value of the ocean. The results are huge, and you're still living with them. And I'm not going to read each and every one of them, but you can see the importance in terms of improved governance that goes with it, sound science coming in to help important decision-making, education of our nation is the importance of the oceans, implementation of a strategy, and then finally a continual follow-up to make sure we don't lose that momentum. So what I'd like to propose for your consideration today is that we use this model to deal with the challenges and impacts that this panel has brought up to you. A U.S. Commission on Weather Policy whose goal is to bring together all the pieces of the puzzle, the three important sectors that comprise the weather enterprise, the public, private, and academic sectors coming together to bring value to the end-to-end capability for us to infuse the science, to allow us to make better products and services, and to allow people to make better decisions about how they react not just to extreme weather, but the day-to-day weather that can impact their lives. What would the goals of such a commission be? I think at a minimum, it would be to secure the federal foundation of baseline observations and forecast services upon which everything is predicated. These data are critical to being able to make forecasts, and any knowledge we can create about the future is good knowledge that allows us to make better decisions to save lives, livelihood, and grow the economy. It would support the research and development necessary for the infusion of the new science and technology that are going to allow us to get better information to the right people at the right time to make better decisions. It will enable our flourishing private sector to rapidly develop specialized products and bring in specialized data to meet those needs, and that's about growing jobs and it's about growing the economy. And finally, it would ensure our economic engine and that our nation is weatherproofed as we move forward for the challenges that we face in the remainder of this century. Thank you so much.
Okay, I appreciate everybody your time here. And we're going to move to the Q&A. I want to move back to the front slide just so you know where we are. And let me say that all the presentations that you've seen here today are going to be available at weathercoalition.org. We're purposely not handing out paper. We'd rather not do that. You can go there and pull the presentation down for any of the data. At this point, let me open the floor to questions, and we have, who has the microphones? David, you have one, and Philip has one back there. We'd like to open the floor to questions at this point. Please don't be bashful, because then the moderator has to exercise moderator's prerogative. So, first question, and if you could identify yourself, who you're with, that would be helpful. All right, we got a bashful group, so I get to open up the first question. Oh, right back here. Go back. Tara.
Hi, hello? Is it on? Okay. Tara Rothschild, I'm with the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Oh, you want me to still stand up? Obviously not bashful, and feel much better at the back of the room. There have been a number of NAS reports, SAB reports, other reports that have been done over the years. One of the criticisms of the MAR has been that, it took so long in an act of Congress in order for Weather Service to actually move in the direction that was needed. This Weather Commission would obviously, come out with another report. The question is that what's going to be different this time? Why is Weather Service going to, or NOAA, going to change its ways in a way that the Commission suggests, as opposed to every other National Academy's report that's come out beforehand?
Okay. I want to show the panelists hear that question. Okay, which is that we've had past reports from the Academy. How do we get behavioral change that we seek? And Tom, why don't you take that one on first?
Yep, it's a great question. And I think what we have here is not reports that are going to come out, but really all the critical stakeholders sitting together at the table and having the tough discussions about prioritizing what needs to be done, who needs to do it, and how it's going to come together, with the imprimatur of the Congress and the administration paying attention to it and following through. It can't just be about government paying for more, but it has to be about sectors coming together and bringing their value because of the critical importance. So my hope is that we don't simply end up with a report at the end, but we follow through like the Ocean Commission did in having tangible outcomes and results and agreement across those sectors to play our appropriate parts in the enterprise.
Let me add one quick thing to that too, Tara, which is I think we've talked about the Basque report in relationship to the Weather Service. The weather enterprise is bigger than the Weather Service. We have a very critical function in the Department of Defense with the Navy and the Air Force supporting weather and oceanographic activities for the warfighter. But they also share data across that continuum. So I think the vision here is actually even bigger than NOAA. It's how does the entire weather enterprise within the public sector and the private sector fit together. And I'd say that my experience with the Ocean Commission is they tied those two together in a way that had not been done. And just for historical reasoning, the first Ocean Commission, which was chaired by Julius Stratton in 1966, led to the formation of NOAA and EPA through Richard Nixon's Executive Orders 3 and 4. One of the things we're going to have to look at based on the Basque recommendations is, do we reorganize? Are we aligned correctly at a national level? The other thing I want to add is we now have a robust private sector. As someone who lived through my early years at NOAA, some folks in the room, I look around, people are becoming kids to me. When I briefed the modernization and restructuring for NOAA back in the early 90s, there was no internet. There were no BlackBerries. There were no iPhones. So it's a very different economy and it's a very different enterprise than it was just 20 years ago. Sorry for that. I had to interject there. I apologize. Next question. Right down here.
I'm Ellen Klitschka from the American Meteorological Society. My question is, are there any barriers to creating this commission?
Let me take that. I think the only real barriers are an incapacity to act and to view the importance of the problem. The steps forward would be for the Congress to think about creating the equivalent of an Oceans Act in 2000 that could create such a commission. I think I can say that the community is generally very much behind putting this together and wants to participate. It sees the importance and it realizes that it's a team sport. So I think only our inability sometimes to move forward is what might prevent us from doing that. And I hope this group will leave energized and work with us to do what needs to be done.
Next question. We have one in the front row, and then we'll work back over there.
Hi, Phil Ardenoy with Raytheon. So a question, two questions. How long might the commission be in force? And if the panel was to be at the kickoff for the commission, can you think of 3 specifics you might ask them to look at first?
Let me take this one again. I think the time scale for the commission would be something that the Congress and the administration would have to jointly sit down and think about and come to a decision on. And the sorts of issues they would take on, I think, are again things that we can make suggestions. We have made suggestions here as the types of activities that should be there. But I think the key part is to bring together the stakeholders and to act promptly on these issues, because there will be another event. There will be another economic impact. And now is the right time to do this.
I'd just like to add there, I'm not sure it's something we'd ask them to do, but there's something I would like them to make use of, and that is a good collection of data and metrics and economic information. And so there are efforts being made now, partly in conjunction with the American Meteorological Society, to collect a better set of economic impact information. And I would hope that they would utilize that.
Right over here.
Bob Gagosian from the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. I participated on the Ocean Panel, the Ocean Commission, and just as a way of background, it's a big deal. It's a lot of work. The commissioners are appointed by Congress. The kickstart occurred with President Clinton's meeting of the President's Ocean meeting in Monterey a long time ago, in the late 1990s. And out of that meeting came the impetus to move towards a commission. So you need support clearly from the administration, but there's got to be strong support from the Congress as well. My second point is I think this is a great idea. As an oceanographer, I actually happen to be really interested in hurricanes since I lived in Cape Cod for a long time. And I think that right now, with the knowledge that we know from ocean observing that's coming online, with what's happening with atmospheric observing, the timing is absolutely key and really perfect for this to take off. And bringing the two communities together to address this issue, I think will also get a lot of support on the Hill. So I really commend the panel for bringing this issue up. And as I said, I think that there's a real opportunity here.
Thank you. And let me just make a quick point, which is the Basque panel did not recommend a weather commission. I want to make sure that that's clear. That was not part of their recommendation. They stopped and made recommendations on the way forward for the Weather Service. So it's UCAR and the Weather Coalition today who are calling for the establishment of the Weather Commission. Next question. I saw it.
Hello, my name is Marcia Barton. I'm an educator. I'm an Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow. I'm a high school science teacher. And I think it's a great idea to have this commission. Like the Ocean Commission, I would really strongly advocate for an education component, which I noticed was not there on your slide. Maybe you already have that in mind. But I would really advocate for not just college level education, but K through 12.
Who wants to take that one on? Bill?
Yeah, education often falls through the cracks, and it's very good that you brought that up. Certainly, we did not mean to neglect that. Coming from the private sector, I'm well aware of the challenge of finding qualified employees, and that comes up over and over again in the private sector, and unless we pay attention to that, we in the private sector won't be able to serve the nation in the way that we need to.
Let me add as well that when you weatherproof a nation, so to speak, you also have to weatherproof the people. In so many cases, we've seen that people often don't make smart decisions with the information they've been given. And so I think your point is spot on, that we need to have our public understand in a more general sense, not that they have to solve important research problems, but they have to understand the risks, the probabilities, the importance, and what they can do to mitigate those impacts on their lives. So I think you've really hit a good point there.
Come right back here.
I'm Rory Marston. I work for a company called Hydronaulics. I used to work for Scott before he had gray hair. On the education aspect, I think that's important. But what I always see that's missing is we have a whole bunch of very smart people, and they can't go back. I'm from Nebraska, so I think in your discussions, when you go out there, you have to explain to Joe Bag of Donuts in Nebraska why weather is important to him when he's farming, or the trucker. But on your slides, I would also like to see that expanded into, Scott brought up defense. But what about the insurance companies? What about the shipping companies, all the logisticians? Are you going to build an outreach program, not just education, but kind of indoctrination of why it's important to everybody?
Tom?
Those customers need to be at the table, and because their needs and requirements are important in shaping where we go. Over 6,000 deaths on the highway due to weather-related incidents, 600,000 injuries. The statistics we could put up about ways in which weather comes in, and you've cited a number of them, are huge, getting that knowledge out. The Midwest is really worrying about what's the next season going to look like. Is drought going to continue? If there's continuing drought, I plant a certain type of crops that are drought resistant. If we're going to get that rainfall coming back, then I can work in other areas. So you're absolutely right. The impacts are huge, and we need to make sure that the requirements are coming in. The private sector does a tremendous job of customer service and going out and finding those requirements, finding those niches, and then tailoring products and services to meet those needs. But I think both the users, the providers, have to be at the table when we put this commission together.
Yeah, this is a great example of how this community has evolved over the last decade or so, from weather where one-size-fits-all weather sort of worked for everybody, or at least in most cases, to very much specialized weather that serves particular needs, particular locations, particular types of variables to achieve what's needed in very niche applications in some cases. And so bringing all of those different voices to the table is really critical. That's where this proposal, I think, will help quite a bit.
So I'd also like to add that there have been efforts in that direction over the last several years. So within the American Meteorological Society, for example, it has committees on health and water resources, energy, renewable energy, transportation, and has at least one yearly meeting where there are speakers invited from communities including the Reinsurance Association of America, agricultural industry. So there are increasing efforts to bring input from those types of user communities into the information gathering, and I agree with you that needs to be continued and expanded.
I have a question back here.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Erica Groh. I actually just joined WUSA TV right here in town, and I'm a meteorologist for the station. So obviously, we are very interested, being a private company that disseminates public information. Are we going to be able to tie in with what you are planning to do? I think it's so important to make sure that the message that we're getting out to the public is the right one.
I just want everybody to know that was not a paid political endorsement from this. Tom, why don't you take that one on?
Erica, absolutely, and welcome to Washington. Again, the stakeholders have to be there. Creating products and services that people don't want or need doesn't do anyone any good. And so we all have to be there, and we're all going to have heavy lift roles to play in this, and yours will be very important.
Next question.
Barry Myers from AccuWeather. I think the complexity that this faces is evidenced by the fact that I appreciated the invitation to come here, but this was the first that I actually heard about this initiative. and many of the other people within certainly the weather industry asked me questions about what it was about that I couldn't answer. And now I have at least a better perspective. But unlike the ocean situation, there is a different kind of private sector that is not only thriving but growing at a substantial, if not tremendous, pace currently, not only within the U.S. but worldwide. And I would encourage those who want to put this initiative forward to realize the complexity that is there so that all the right touchstones can be accomplished.
Barry, absolutely. And this is the first that a lot of people are hearing about this. And we hope this will begin a discussion that ripples through the entire enterprise and comes back here to Washington with a lot of great input like that. And we certainly need everyone who's involved with this complex enterprise to play a part and be there, stand up and be counted, and make sure that it does good things.
Let me just add one thing to that, Barry, which is at the AMS summer meeting, we sat around as a community and had a discussion about this, and there was an epiphany coming out of the Basque report, which is how does our community organize itself and align itself? And I can just say again, to hark back to my past days at NOAA before the internet and the World Wide Web, it has really changed. And I don't know what it's going to look like 10 years from now. If there's anybody in this room who can tell us what this enterprise is going to look like 10 years from now, please tell me, because I'm an investor. I have a lot of young children who I need to send to college. But what I can tell you is the American public at a very critical level is going to be extremely interested in this information because their lives and livelihoods depend upon it. And I would come back, Barry, to exactly what you just said, which is we now do have an industry that's thriving. We have an edge here, and that is a really critical issue. And the point that Bill made, that in a down economy, private weather companies are making money by adding value to a public product. I don't want to call it GPS on steroids and make that comparison, but it's a very important moment in the history of the weather enterprise as we move forward. Let me stop there. Any more questions? Sir, right down here.
Hi, I'm Pavel Penev with EIR. I wanted to know if you've looked into the need to launch more equipment such as satellites to increase the ability for weather forecasting. Right now there are, for example, some experiments that are planned by nations like Russia and Ukraine to study things like solar wind, which have an impact on the ionosphere and then the weather events that occur on the Earth. And also, it's interesting because most of the weather forecasting that exists today is an outcome of what we had with space exploration, the original space program. Whether you've looked at recommendations for how to continue expanding the abilities to do that. Yeah.
Tom, you want to take that one?
These are all things that I think a commission needs to look at and prioritize. And I want to stress again that prioritization is important for this field. As we find ourselves in difficult budget times, it's critical that we make those kind of decisions in an informed capacity by having the right people there to make them. Because if we do not make those decisions, other people will make them for us.
Yes, right here.
Hey, I'm Jeb Berman with the Friends of NOAA Coalition. Dr. Emch mentioned an effort to collect some more data and information on some of the real-world impacts, costs avoided, that kind of thing, of the weather enterprise. We've heard a couple of citations of some data today. Can you give us a sense of kind of the context of that and the kind of information that you guys intend to be able to deploy?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that question, Jeb. I really appreciate it. So I am actually leading the ad hoc committee for AMS on the evaluation of the weather enterprise. And what we are working to develop is an RFP that AMS will execute that looks at the size of the enterprise as well as the impact. We do not have as a community data that says we are a $10 billion industry or a $50 billion. We don't have that. So we're trying to put together an RFP with the support of AMS and the Commission on Climate and Weather Enterprise, led by Matt Parker out of the Savannah River, who I report to in this capacity. We're trying to put an RFP together. If we meet our timeline, it will actually come out during AMS in Austin in January. I can't promise that, but we need that data as a community, and it's very hard to get. And I can tell you from my time being inside NOAA, due to the Paperwork Reduction Act, it's very hard to have the government do that. So we as a community have stepped forward, and what I can tell you is we have commitments from a number of private weather vendors, as well as some universities who are committing money to the effort because collectively we want this data. And I think that's a great story, that they want this data to be able to say, this is who we impact, this is how we impact. I don't know how many times in my previous capacity, when I worked on the Hill, I'd ask, well, what's the size of your industry? What are we talking about? And it's very difficult for me to come here because we have a smattering of reports, but no definitive number that our community agrees on. So I'm leading that effort. That's why Pam kicked the question over to me. If things work out correctly, we will have the RFP out in January of 2013 with either a 16 or 18-month deliverable. So I can tell you that is in process, and I commend the AMS for taking this and letting the community move this effort forward. It's something we've called for, and now we have people who are putting up money. And I'm always convinced that people are putting up money, that means they're committed to making it happen. I stop there. Question over here.
Scott, Alan Cook, MDA. Perhaps it's stating the obvious, but the earlier speaker talked about sensors. I think it's important that we remember that weather phenomenology occurs at all scales. Yeah, and we tend to respond to what's chopping us in the knees at the moment. It does the latest disaster. But the sharing of the data across scales and across enterprises is vital to our understanding of the system.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, Tom, let me who wants to take that comment on? You want to take that one, John?
First of all, let me just say in response to the previous remark that the work of our National Academies Committee was hampered in some respects by just this lack that you've just been talking about. It was very hard for us to put any peer-reviewed numbers on the size of the industry. Now, to come to the question about the sharing of data, it strikes me that is, they say that the devil is in the details. Well, there's a lot of details when it comes to the sources of data on different scales, the sharing of that. And I think that is a perfect example of the sort of problem. I'm sure this is something that a commission, if it comes to pass, can usefully work on. But what I'm hoping, and what our National Academies report endorsed, was that there be some experiments in the public-private partnership on some of these issues. Now, we didn't say it was specifically that issue, but there are a lot of issues of ownership, of proprietary advantage, of questions, yes, I'll give you the data, but I don't want you to give it to anybody else, kinds of things. So I think that is one of the key issues that needs to be resolved in some way going forward in order for the enterprise to realize the added value for the nation that it can.
All right. Yes, sir.
I'd like to continue on that point just a little bit. The AMS has a committee called the Nationwide Network of Networks, which does address the question of how to transfer data between different branches, different stakeholders, and how to share that data. That was a major component of that Nationwide Network of Networks report that went out of the AMS, and it is on the AMS website.
We had one other question here, and then, all right, two more questions, and those are the last two. All right, if you have another question, we'll go three. I saw a hand go halfway up over there. Who's right here? Where was that? Yes, sir.
Hey, I'm Peter Martinson. I'm from EIR also. Over the past couple of years, there's been, every time there's a huge weather event, a big damaging weather event, there's a large effort to immediately blame it on global warming. Now, everybody knows that, you know, there's a raging battle going on between the warmists versus the deniers worldwide. It's a very political issue. What I'd like to know is how is the Commission prepared to navigate the issue of, you know, global warming, whether it exists or not, and that aspect that it's very political.
Tom?
The Commission is going to be focused on weather and weather impacts on a variety of scales. And drought, for instance, is, I hope, something that the Commission will think about. We need to focus there first because there are immediate activities and impacts on us as a nation.
Back row, there we go. Yes, sir.
I'm John Wortman with the Association of American Geographers. We have a high number of researchers who do research on weather-related impacts on health, on human health. And there's been no real discussion yet today of the healthcare system, the medical profession. How will they be engaged in the community and the Commission, and what will be their role?
Tom?
Another great question. We didn't mention all the impacts because we only had so much time. It's clear that as we have changes in weather trends and patterns, along with that go impacts on vector-borne diseases. For instance, a lot of the fires in the West that we're seeing are a result of pine beetle kill that has large swaths of forest that are dead. And so what would have been in the past reasonable drought periods turn into tinderboxes because of that added impact. I certainly hope that when the Congress and the administration comes together to charter a commission, that they look broadly at the users and the impacts across all the sectors, and that things like that would be considered.
Yeah, I just want to add, this is a great example of a community that seems to be underserved by weather information that could be used more effectively, and we've seen a number of similar things. Again, the reason for this commission is to make sure that those sorts of things are properly served rather than just questions in forums such as this.
All right, one more question. The last question goes to the Acting Director of the National Weather Service, Laura Fergione. We're in big trouble now.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate everything you're doing and interested to see more of the details. This obviously will help us advance building a weather-ready nation. And so that's one of the questions. You're really using our mission in regards of protecting lives and livelihood and stimulating the American economy. So will you also do you anticipate using and helping us further brand the Weather Ready Nation initiative that we're using? And Tom, you mentioned that a little bit, so just wanted to further emphasize that. Thank you.
I think it's a great initiative, and I certainly hope that the Commission, when it comes together, looks into issues like that and really connects across those three sectors. We're all in this together, and I think we can all provide things for each other so we can succeed in what we're doing.
I want to thank our panelists today for their presentations. I want to thank the folks out here. I want to thank the folks out here from the community and the dialogue we had. And as I've told people, this is the opening stage of introducing the concept of the Weather Commission. We want to thank, of course, the House Science Committee, but all the other staffers that have come here. Mr. Bonner from the Appropriations Committee. I know there's a number of folks here in the room. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy. And we will look forward to continuing this dialogue and moving forward. Thank you.